Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take some really dense source material, the kind that usually feels pretty inaccessible, frankly.
Absolutely. Very systematic stuff.
And our job is to translate it, make it clear, make it high impact so you can really grasp it.
Yeah.
Today, we're diving into an exceptionally, rigorous framework. It tackles maybe the biggest cosmic question out there. How is the entire universe actually redeemed?
And this is truly foundational material we're looking at. These aren't just suggestions. The sources lay out a very logical, step-by-step case for divine justice, why sacrificial atonement is necessary, and the precise sequence of events.
Right, the chronology, how the whole created cosmos moves from being vulnerable to sin to a state of, ultimate irreversible perfection.
Exactly. It's comprehensive.
So our mission for you today, our listener, is to get a quick but thorough handle on this complex system. We're analyzing texts that argue the whole point of creation actually hinges on the cross.
That's a huge claim.
It is, and they define this strict framework, spatial, chronological, for how the universe, which they call the created order, gets cleansed and fulfilled.
And what makes this challenging, but I think really rewarding to understand, is this central tension they tackle head on. How can God be both incredibly loving and totally uncompromisingly just?
They often seem like they pull in opposite directions.
They can seem that way, yeah. But this system insists they must be perfectly fulfilled at the same time. And related to that, we really need to understand this unbreakable link between the divine standard, the law, the commandment, and the ultimate solution, the atonement, the cross.
They're like two sides of the same coin in this view.
Exactly. You can't have one without the other making sense. They're fundamentally necessary for each other within this theological structure.
Okay, so we've got a clear path then. We'll start by defining the boundaries of this created order. What exactly are we talking about? And what's the essential role, the dual function, really, of Christ's blood within those boundaries? Then we'll tackle that deep paradox. The law is holy, it's good, but without the cross, it actually guarantees universal death, which is quite something.
It's a stark claim.
And finally, we'll map out the detailed 5-phase timeline, the grand chronology of how final judgment happens and how creation is systematically brought to completion.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, let's unpack this.
All right. So, first things first. To really get the scale of redemption we're discussing, we have to nail down what these sources mean by the created order.
Right, because it's not just a feeling or a general spiritual idea.
No, not at all. It's a precisely defined set of realms, specific places that require cleansing.
And they use this really interesting structure rooted in ancient religious symbolism, like the tabernacle, but then map it onto actual cosmic geography. It gives the whole system this feeling of, integrated reality, both physical and spiritual.
It does. It's quite clever. The sources use the structure of the ancient tabernacle. You know, the physical space designed for purification to lay out the cosmic architecture that needs atonement. They define the created order as the sum of three parts. It's the sanctuary, plus the lever, plus the altar. That's the symbolic boundary. Everything within that needs redemption.
Sanctuary, laver, altar. That's a powerful set of images. But what does that translate to in, let's say, more cosmic terms? Where are these places?
Well, the sources are explicit. They give us the equation. The sanctuary, which was God's symbolic dwelling place, that translates to the actual temple, think the heavenly realm, the domain of unfallen spiritual beings, angels and such.
Okay, the heavens.
Then the laver, that basin used for washing, for purification, that's equated to the sea of glass, often interpreted as like the sort of intermediate space within creation.
Right, the cosmic sea.
And finally, the altar, the place of sacrifice. That corresponds to Hades, the realm of the departed, those awaiting judgment or resurrection.
Wow. So when these sources talk about atonement, it's way bigger than just earth and humanity. It's the cleansing of this whole structure. The heavens, the in-between spaces, and the realm of the dead.
That's the scale.
Yeah.
Immense. Every single part of that defined structure is subject to the atonement. It has to be cleansed.
And the engine for all this cosmic cleansing.
It's singular. The blood of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
The primary claim, the absolute core here, is that the entire created order is redeemed, as the original might put it, and all sin is systematically erased from it by that blood.
I want to pause on the function of the blood for a second, because it seems like it's doing more than just paying a debt, right? There's this dual demonstration of God's character happening.
Yes, and that's key to understanding the, let's call it, the elegance of the plan from the perspective of these sources. The atonement, the act itself, simultaneously shows God's radical love, his willingness to give up everything, hold nothing back for the creature.
The ultimate sacrifice.
Exactly. And at the same time, his uncompromising justice, the fact that the law demanded a penalty, a substitutionary death was required. Both aspects must be visible. And the cross is presented as the only act capable of displaying them in perfect balance.
Because if it was only one or the other,
The system wouldn't work, according to this theology. If it was only justice, it wouldn't demonstrate love. If it was only love without satisfying justice, the moral order wouldn't hold.
that brings up a really important point about what sin is in this framework. It's not just breaking a rule. It sounds like a deeper corruption.
It is. The source material frames it as a spiritual and psychological issue, too. The blood specifically has to eradicate the lie that Satan planted in the hearts of creatures.
A lie that caused doubt about God.
Exactly. Doubt about his goodness, his authority, his intentions. It introduced a fundamental distrust into the system.
So the atonement isn't just legal. It's almost like cosmic therapy.
That's a good way to put it, actually. Satan's rebellion wasn't just, trying to take over. It injected this corrosive cynicism, this doubt, right into the very structure of created free will.
But couldn't God just command belief? Or use his power to just wipe out the doubt? Why the elaborate cross mechanism?
Because, the argument goes, that would violate the integrity of free will. It wouldn't actually convince anyone of God's trustworthiness. If the core problem is doubt about God's character, maybe he seems unfair or harsh. Simply judging the one who planted the doubt, Satan, doesn't fix the trust issue for everyone else.
Ah, okay. So judging Satan proves God is just against evil, but it doesn't necessarily prove he's loving towards the creatures who were deceived.
Precisely. The sources make that distinction very clear. Judging Satan, condemning him, even destroying him, shows that breaking the law has consequences. It demonstrates justice, sure, but it doesn't demonstrate that self-sacrificial love needed to heal the doubt.
And they really emphasize this contrast, don't they? That Satan's blood or his punishment can't wipe out the lie he planted. Hearts aren't purified by seeing him judged.
Right. Because seeing the deceiver burned might make creatures fear God's power, but it doesn't inherently make them love him or trust his goodness. The question, is God good or just powerful, could still linger, even for the righteous angels.
So only Christ's blood.
Only Christ's blood, representing the willing sacrifice of God himself in human form, can truly purify hearts. It removes that planted lie by demonstrating undeniable, costly love that goes beyond mere power or judgment.
Okay, that clarifies why the cross is needed over just judgment alone. Even righteous judgment wouldn't achieve the same goal of restoring trust and love.
Exactly. Judgment confirms a law was broken and the penalties paid by the offender. But these sources argue that's insufficient for the ultimate goal. Judgment alone doesn't prove God's love in a way that secures the creature's free will against falling into doubt again, potentially generations later.
So judgment needs context. It serves a purpose, but it's not the whole story.
Yes. The sources are quite emphatic here. Judgment only really has meaning within the context of the cross. Without the cross providing that demonstration of love and substitution, judgment becomes, well, almost meaningless in the grand scheme. It just shows God is powerful enough to enforce rules.
It doesn't complete the picture.
Right. And in fact, the cross itself is presented as a form of judgment, a judgment on sin, but executed through substitution, through love.
Which brings us back to that legal requirement. The commandment insists the first Adam, the representative head who sinned, has to die. How does the system satisfy that without just wiping out all of creation?
And here's where the principle of substitution becomes the absolute linchpin. It's the solution that upholds both justice and love. The law's demand is met because the debt is paid.
But not by the original debtor?
Exactly. The cornerstone here is that the last Adam, Christ, consciously steps in. He dies on the cross in place of the first Adam. This act satisfies the full requirement of the law, ensuring justice is served meticulously.
While simultaneously being the ultimate act of love.
The ultimate act of costly love, yes. And the sources stress that without this substitution, the whole structure collapses. The purpose of creation itself would be voided because the legal demand wouldn't be met in a way that also affirms God's character.
Okay, that really sets up a profound tension, doesn't it? The cross is the only way. But it's only necessary because there's this fundamental law demanding payment in the first place.
Precisely. And that leads us straight into the core paradox of the whole system.
Right. Section 2, the commandment, the cross, and this idea of universal death without the cross.
We have to dig into this because the sources insist the commandment, the law, isn't just, helpful guidance. It's absolutely essential, foundational. But it's also inherently lethal to creatures on its own.
Okay, let's start with why it has to exist. If the end game is grace through the cross, why not just skip the law altogether? Seems simpler.
It might seem simpler, but the logic here is tight. Without the commandment, there's no need for the cross. The law is the objective measure, the standard. If there isn't a specific, eternal, perfect standard and no clear penalty for failing it, then the whole idea of a substitutionary death becomes, well, unnecessary, arbitrary even.
So the law defines the problem that the cross solves. It sets the stakes.
It defines the stakes, the consequence, the sheer gravity of sin, and the gravity is immense. According to these texts, the law is the very instrument that performs a righteous condemnation. It's what throws the sinner, the transgressor, into the ultimate penalty, the lake of fire.
But they're also very clear that the law itself isn't evil or bad.
Crucial point. Absolutely not. The law itself is described as inherently holy, righteous, and good. It's a perfect reflection of God's own character. It's not a flawed system. It's the perfect standard that establishes the conditions under which only a perfect, divine sacrifice, the cross, becomes both necessary and meaningful.
If the standard wasn't perfect, the payment wouldn't need to be so ultimate.
Exactly. A lesser standard might allow for a lesser solution. But because the law is perfect, the solution must also be perfect and satisfy its demands completely.
Okay, so the law is good. It defines perfection. But then there's the application. When applied to creatures, beings with limits, maybe inherent flaws or at least vulnerabilities, there's a fatal flaw.
There is. The commandment, simply by being an absolute unbending standard, cannot perfect the creature's free will. It can only judge the creature's inevitable imperfections. It functions as a test, a benchmark, but it offers no inherent power to succeed in meeting that benchmark.
It reveals the gap, but doesn't bridge it.
Precisely. And here's the really devastating claim the sources make. Without the intervention of the cross, the safety net, all creatures, every single one, would eventually break the commandment.
Wait, all creatures, not just humans, angels too.
That's the assertion. This isn't just about the fall of man. It's a statement about the inherent nature of created beings with free will when measured against an absolute standard over time. Given enough opportunity, under the pressure of perfect law and their own finite, vulnerable freedom, every creature would eventually transgress.
That's universal, guaranteed failure, a cosmic certainty.
It's presented as an acknowledgement of creaturely limitation. So if the cross is taken out of the equation, the commandment inevitably leads to the death of all creatures. Every single one would, by the law's own righteous judgment, be cast into the lake of fire.
So the law, intended for righteousness, becomes the mechanism of universal death.
Yes. For creatures left to their own devices, the law becomes death.
But that sounds contradictory. Why would a loving God create beings only for them to face a guaranteed universal death sentence? It feels pointless, almost cruel.
And this is exactly the argument the sources use to explain the why of creation, linking it intrinsically to the cross. If the guaranteed, inescapable end result of creating beings was their universal destruction, then God would have had no logical or moral justification for creating them in the first place.
The whole project would just populate the lake of fire?
It would be irrational, pointless.
Unless the solution was already part of the plan from the beginning.
Exactly. The cross isn't plan B, it's plan A. It's fundamental to the very intention behind creation. It retroactively justifies the risk involved in creating beings with free will that's vulnerable to failure when measured by the law.
So the cross guarantees life before the risk of the law is even fully manifested.
That's the idea. If creation under the law introduces the potential for universal failure and death, then the guarantee of ultimate perfected life through the cross must be in place from the outset to make the creative act meaningful, loving, and morally coherent. It establishes God's intention was always redemption and perfection, not just setting up a test. Everyone was doomed to fail.
Okay, let's unpack that phrase you mentioned earlier, that life and death reside within the commandment itself. And the sources say creatures were created within death. That's a startling way to put it. What does that mean?
It's a dense phrase, but it means that from the moment of its existence, every creature was placed under the jurisdiction of the law. And that law inherently carried the penalty of death for any failure. So they were born, metaphorically speaking, into a state of pre-existing liability.
A state of mortality dictated by the possibility of transgression.
Yes, their continued existence, their potential for eternal life, was entirely contingent on perfect, unbroken obedience, which, as we just established, the sources say was theoretically impossible for any creature to maintain indefinitely on their own.
It does sound like being born inside a house that's technically already condemned, protected only by a perfect but impossibly fragile security system.
That's a decent analogy. And this framework identifies only one exit from that intrinsically legal state.
The cross.
Only through the cross do creatures move out of that state, bound by the law's death penalty, and into life. The cross is the transition mechanism. It takes the creature from the shadow of the law, the state of vulnerability and death, into the security of the atonement, the state of eternal life and eventual perfection.
And the ultimate outcome of this transition, for the whole system, is the elimination of the threat itself. When all the righteous creatures have made that transition into life.
Then the source declares death itself is thrown into the lake of fire.
Not just sinners, but death as a concept, as a power.
Yes, it's a profound statement about finality. It signifies the destruction of mortality as a fundamental structural element of the created order. Death, personified almost as the last enemy inherent in the law's condemning function, is finally annihilated. This proves the law's power to condemn has been completely overcome and neutralized by the cross's power to give life.
Okay, so the legal and structural problems are solved, but that doesn't guarantee it won't happen again, does it? If creatures still have free will, even after being saved by the cross, what stops a new rebellion, a new fall, centuries later?
Now we move into the moral and psychological securing of the system. Section 3, the completion of free will and removing the very potential for sin.
This seems crucial for making the perfection truly permanent.
It absolutely is, and it boils down to a fundamental shift in motivation for the creature moving from fear to love. This is maybe the deepest psychological insight these texts offer.
And they challenge a common idea here, right? That just seeing God punish the wicked, seeing sinners thrown into the lake of fire, that this isn't enough to make creatures truly love God or keep the commandments perfectly forever.
Exactly. That's a major departure from simple fear-based theological models. If fear was the ultimate motivator and sufficient for perfection, then the prospect of universal annihilation under the law should have worked from the beginning.
But it didn't. Or the texts say it wouldn't have.
Right. Fear might compel outward compliance for a time. It can suppress transgression while the threat is immediate, but it doesn't necessarily change the heart. It doesn't foster genuine, freely chosen devotion. The doubt, the potential resentment could still remain internally.
So fear is temporary, transactional. It only works as long as the punishment is visible or felt.
Precisely. The only thing, according to these sources, that produces true, enduring love and consequently perfect chosen obedience is the creature witnessing and internalizing the staggering cost of the cross.
Seeing what God gave up for them.
Seeing God give up everything for them. That act, that power of sacrificial love, is what finally eradicates the lie of doubt Satan planted. It answers the question about God's character definitively.
And that love becomes the engine for perfecting the creature.
Yes, it's through internalizing this love of the cross, understanding its depth and cost, that the free will of creatures is finally completed or perfected. And that completion is the ultimate theological goal. Not forced obedience, not fearful servitude, but genuine perfected freedom rooted in reciprocal love and devotion.
A free will that chooses righteousness because it loves the source of righteousness.
Exactly. And once that free will is perfected through love, the universe achieves a state of irreversible security. Because the ultimate achievement hammered home in the source material is that the blood of Christ doesn't just forgive past sins, it erases the possibility of committing sin from the perfected creatures.
Okay, erases the possibility. That phrase is incredibly strong. It's not just making it unlikely or giving them strength against temptation. It sounds like a fundamental change in their nature.
It implies absolute permanence, definitive security. If sin remains possible, even remotely, then the perfected state isn't truly perfect or eternal. It's just a temporary high point. This erasure of possibility is what makes the final state truly final.
And the source links this directly to grace versus law.
Yes, it explicitly claims that sin will not master those who are under grace. That is, under the covering and effect of the cross rather than under the law. The law identified the problem and condemned. Grace, through the cross, transforms the creature's very capacity for choice, removing the rude possibility of choosing sin again.
But hang on. If love perfects free will for the righteous and the possibility of sin is erased for them, why is judgment still necessary? Why does the law still need to be enforced at the end? Who is left to judge?
That's a fair question.
Mm.
It's because the created order is complex, and crucially, not all creatures accept the atonement. And the system must account for justice, particularly for those who suffer oppression.
Ah, so it's about dealing with the unrepentant transgressors.
Yes. If a being continues to transgress, continues to oppress neighbors, and is simply ignored or allowed to continue without consequence, then God's love and justice are not fully revealed to the watching universe. The innocent would continue to suffer, and other creatures might misunderstand God, seeing him as maybe weak or indifferent to evil or unjust himself.
So, for the sake of cosmic clarity and justice, judgment must still be executed according to the commandment.
It must.
Yeah.
To maintain order, protect the innocent victims, and demonstrate God's righteous character. But remember the paradox.
Right. We established the law is universally lethal on its own.
Exactly. And since all creatures are technically transgressors in their natural state before the cross's effect, the final sweeping enforcement of the law, the righteous judgment must happen through the filter of the cross.
Okay, explain that. How does judgment happen through the filter of the cross?
It means that when the final judgment based on the commandment covers the entire created order, only those who are found in the cross, covered by its atonement, survive and are brought into that perfected state. For everyone else, the law executes its natural consequence.
So the cross acts like a shield for the righteous, but for the unrighteous.
It doesn't shield them. In fact, the blood itself is described as having a dual action, depending on the individual's response.
Okay, what's the dual action?
For creatures who repent, who accept the sacrifice, the blood removes sin. It cleanses them, their actions, their conscience, the root lie. It's an agent of life, restoration, and perfection.
But for those who refuse to repent, who reject the cross.
For them, the sources say the blood removes them. It wipes them out, erases them from the perfected created order.
Yeah.
It acts almost like a purifying or neutralizing agent on the unrighteous element itself.
Wow. So it either purifies the creature or purges the creature from the system.
That's the stark binary outcome presented. When the blood covers the created order in this final application, the possibility of transgression is removed from the repentant they achieve perfected free will. But that possibility is not removed from the unrepentant. Instead, they are removed, cast into the lake of fire. Sin is eliminated from the universe either way, by purification from within the creature or by the removal of the creature who clings to it.
This naturally leads us from the principles, the why and how, to the actual sequence, the cosmic timeline. How does this incredibly systematic cleansing actually unfold?
Right. Section 4, the chronology of final atonement and completion. This is where the sources lay out the definitive roadmap, the step-by-step sequence for purging sin and perfecting the universe. It's presented as 5 distinct phases.
5 phases, moving systematically through those realms we defined earlier, temple Hades.
Exactly. It's methodical.
And the whole grand process kicks off with a pivotal event for the faithful.
The first resurrection. That's the starting gun.
Okay, phase 1.
Phase 1, the atonement of the actual temple. The process starts at the top, in the heavenly realm. Christ's blood covers the actual temple, erasing sin there immediately upon the first resurrection.
Why start there?
It secures the eternal state of the righteous spiritual beings. First, the angels and other heavenly inhabitants who remained faithful. It stabilizes the core of the redeemed order.
And this involves that erasure of possibility we just talked about applied to them.
Precisely. The sources specify that the righteous angels, through the power of Christ's blood linked to the first resurrection, have the very possibility of transgression erased from them.
So it's not that they were sinful, but that they were potentially vulnerable.
Exactly. It's a preventative securing. They are confirmed in their righteousness and love, moving from a state of potentially vulnerable free will to perfected, eternally secure free will. They aren't erased or judged because they are righteous. They are simply perfected.
Okay, so phase 1 completes the atonement of the heavenly domain. The foundation is secure. What's next?
With the temple secure, the cleansing process moves downward, cosmically speaking, to the next defined realm, Hades.
Phase 2, the atonement of Hades, the realm of the departed.
Right after the temple is secured, Christ atones for Hades. His blood covers that realm, erasing sin there.
And this happens before Hades itself is ultimately destroyed.
Yes, crucially, the sources note this cleansing happens before Hades is thrown into the lake of fire, an event they place 1,000 years later. This timing is important. It shows the realm must be purified first, so that the righteous within it can be secured before the structure itself is done away with.
So the repentant souls waiting in Hades undergo the same process as the angels.
The same fundamental process. Through Christ's blood, connected conceptually to the power of the first resurrection, the repentant people within Hades also have the possibility of transgression erased. They are secured, perfected in potential, protected from the final judgment of the law, where they await the next stage.
So they're safe, even though the realm they're in is destined for destruction.
Yes, their individual salvation and perfection are secured by the blood, independent of the fate of the realm itself. Once this is done for all the repentant within it, the atonement of Hades is considered complete. Now, the two main realms holding the faithful, the celestial temple and the waiting place of Hades, are purified and secured.
Okay, the faithful realms are cleansed. Now the focus shifts to the source of the original problem, the adversary.
Exactly. Phase 3, binding the opponent. With the places of the righteous cleansed, the adversary, the sources identify this figure clearly, sometimes using terms like Satan or the opponent needs to be dealt with.
Oh.
He is confined, bound in the abyss.
For how long?
The texts specify a period of 1,000 years. This millennium seems to be a period where the perfected creation begins to flourish, free from active, large-scale deception from the primary source.
And after the 1,000 years?
Then comes the final removal. This primary opponent, along with accomplices like the false prophets and the rebellious kings of the earth who explicitly rejected the atonement, are thrown directly into the lake of fire. It's a staged, methodical removal of the principal agents of cosmic rebellion.
Okay, temple cleansed, Hades cleansed, and residents secured, primary adversary bound, and then judged. What's left?
We move to the final, all-encompassing judgment and the removal of the last vestiges of the old fallen order. Phase 4, the final judgment. This is the famous Great White Throne judgment.
And what happens here? What's finally removed?
This is where the remaining structures associated with mortality and rebellion are eliminated. The sources specify death and Hades themselves.
Not just the people in Hades, but Hades itself as a place or concept, and death itself.
Yes, the metaphysical structure of death, the power that held sway under the law, and the physical or spiritual location of Hades, the holding place, these are now obsolete and are cast into the lake of fire. This is explicitly called the second death.
So this act removes mortality and the place of waiting entirely from the universe.
Precisely. Along with any remaining unrepentant transgressors who made it to this final judgment having rejected the cross, they are all consigned to the lake of fire. This definitively eliminates death, that last enemy, inherent in the law structure from the newly perfected cosmos. The created order is now officially free from its structural vulnerability to sin, mortality, and separation.
The cleanup is complete, the universe is purged. So the final phase must be about the resulting state.
Exactly. Phase 5, completion and presentation. The purification is total. Sin has been completely erased from the entire created order.
And what remains? What does the universe look like now?
It looks like perfected free will in action. Only creatures who genuinely love God and their neighbor remain. Only those who keep the commandments, not out of fear anymore, but because their perfected wills are aligned with God's will through the love demonstrated and instilled by the cross.
This is the finish line, the original purpose achieved.
Yes. This marks the successful realization of why creation happened in the first place, according to this theology. Creation is completed and perfected. It's irreversible. It's unassailable. It's entirely fulfilled in its intended glorious state. No possibility of falling again.
And there's a final symbolic act, a transfer.
A crucial one. The culmination of this entire cosmic redemption arc is when the Son, Christ, the agent of atonement and perfection, formally presents this now completed, perfected creation to the Father.
Having done what?
Having, as the texts say, destroyed every rival rule, authority, and power. Everything that stood against the divine order has been nullified or removed. This presentation signals the absolute end of the redemption phase and the transition into the eternal state of being.
And that eternal state is described how? What is the final state?
The ultimate description is that the Father, God himself, becomes all in all.
All in all. What does that signify?
It signifies the ultimate unification. The entire perfected universe exists in complete harmony under God, having achieved perfect order, populated by beings with perfected wills, living in perfect obedience born of love. Free forever from the shadow of transgression, doubt, death, or any possibility of future failure. It's the final, absolute state of realized divine purpose.
Wow, okay. Let's try to synthesize this deep dive. It's been incredibly rigorous, laying out the systematic theology where justice, the law, and redemption, the cross, aren't enemies. They're actually inseparable partners.
Mutually dependent necessities, really. The whole system is designed to achieve this complete eradication of sin, not just forgiveness, but eradication, and the simultaneous perfection of free will. And the only mechanism that can do both, according to these sources, is sacrificial love demonstrated through the cross.
And that cross is doing so many things at once.
It really is. It's the legal payment satisfying the law. It's the psychological cure for the doubt Satan planted. It's the securing agent that erases the future possibility of sin in the righteous. It's the filter for final judgment. It has to be all those things to make the system work.
The sources weave this incredibly tight narrative, don't they? From the very first moment of creation, explaining why it needed the cross, all the way to the final annihilation of death itself.
It's impressively comprehensive in its scope and internal logic.
I think for you listening, maybe the most powerful or perhaps even startling takeaway from this framework is how it defines cosmic completion. It's not just about punishing the bad guys and rewarding the good guys.
No, it goes much deeper.
The real success, the sign that creation is truly finished and perfect, is the erasure of the potential for sin itself. From every single righteous component, angels, humans, the very fabric of the renewed reality.
That's the definition of security here. Absolute irreversibility. That inability to transgress ever again is the key to making the perfection eternal. If that potential remained, even dormant, the whole cycle of rebellion and redemption could theoretically restart somewhere, sometime.
So theology succeeds, in its own terms, only if it achieves that absolute secured finality.
That's the claim.
So what does this all mean when you step back from the intricate details?
Well, I think it forces us to confront the relationship between suffering, sacrifice, and existence itself in a really profound way. The source material is arguing, quite radically, that the entire project of creation was fundamentally dependent on the cross being necessary beforehand.
That if the cross wasn't needed.
Then there would have been no logical or loving reason for God to create beings who were, by the nature of the law alone, destined for guaranteed failure and death. The act of creation, in his view, was only justifiable because the atonement was already the planned, guaranteed outcome.
It was a risk only taken because the safety net was absolute and already in place. Essentially, yes. The creation project was a profound theological risk, but one undertaken only because the ultimate success through the atonement was already secured in the divine plan.
Okay, that definitely leaves us with a final provocative thought to mull over. If this comprehensive view is right, if the very meaning of existence, the justification for creating anything or anyone, hinges entirely on the necessity of this ultimate, radical divine sacrifice, does that imply that love expressed through suffering and substitution isn't just a way God interacts with the world, but perhaps the only truly coherent explanation for why anything exists at all in the face of potential chaos and failure?
That's a deep question to sit with, a profound thought indeed.
Well, thank you for joining us for this incredibly detailed journey through atonement, justice, and the completion of the created order. We really hope this exploration of these complex ideas, universal reconciliation, perfected free will, the interplay of law and grace, gives you a fresh perspective, something substantial to think about regarding divine intention and the ultimate shape of reality.
It's certainly a lot to consider. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.